This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 510, Drupal Hooks. Drop them like they're hot. On today's show, we're talking about Drupal Hooks, why they got changed in core, and what to do now with guest Karoly Négyesi, better known as Checks. We'll also cover Media Folder as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Chex. He has been a contributing to Drupal for 21 years, and not just on countless patches, but mentoring quite a few people as well. He is a Drupal consultant and is currently looking for his next opportunity. Chex, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are, with a snazzy new title, Martin Anderson Klutz, Principal Solutions Engineer at Acquia. What's going on, Martin?
Thanks. Great to be here.
And also somebody who's very excited. I mean, very, very, very excited about today's topic and has actually done quite a bit of work to help push this along. Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
I'm happy to be here, and I am always excited to be here. But yes, this topic is very near and dear to my heart.
I don't think excited is the right word for this. I mean, ecstatic,
Yeah.
there are many other words, but anyway, we'll get to the topic in a minute, but now let's turn it over to Martin, a principal solutions engineer at Acquia, and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own, to talk about our module of the week. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to have your Drupal site's media assets presented in a UI that evokes the hierarchy of a file system? There's a module for that. It's called Media Folders, and it was created in April of 2025 by Yao Mauricio, or Jay Mauricio, as people may know him on Drupal.org. It has a 1.0.3 version available, which supports Drupal 10.3 and 11. It is actively maintained, has security and test coverage, and has 9 open issues, 2 of which are bugs, although one was just fixed, which is pretty good considering it is officially in use by 61 sites according to Drupal.org. The module mimics a file structure by associating media entities with a taxonomy hierarchy. It then provides an intuitive drag and drop UI to move items between locations, drag in new items, or even search within a particular folder, including a recursive search. When you drag in files, it uses smart logic to automatically assign files to media bundles, and it provides a form display widget, a view display widget, a CK editor plugin, and it's compatible with other file system modules like S3 file system. Now, this kind of interface is a requirement I've seen in RFPs by companies looking for a new CMS. So having this available as a drop-in solution feels like a win for the Drupal community. Let's talk about media folders.
I mean, this one feels like pretty great to me. It harkens me back to like old school Drupal where you had, was it IMCE?
Yeah.
And you had folder structures in there to be able to like put things in folders in kind of that standard way. I imagine this is super useful, especially if you have something like a dam powering your media library and you kind of need assets to be kind of grouped together in such a way where, like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but like media library just kind of puts your assets on in a table, right? It doesn't really group them. Of course, it's a view. You can add filters to it if you want to filter things down, but like there's no real way to kind of like group them together. So this feels like a pretty good solution to that, or at least a nice X add-on to make finding assets a little bit easier for your users. Yeah, I think this is a great idea.
Well, I think it's important to point out that this doesn't actually change the physical digital structure of the folders. So it's not going to place them in a different location. It's just an organizational, and it's a taxonomy. Now, my question is, can you have subcategories? Because the example image just shows kind of the core audio document, image, remote video, and video bundles. I imagine this really is only useful if you have subfolders within those. And as long as it provides that, I think it's still valuable because it is organizational. But yeah, do you know?
Yeah, it's a great question. As you say, when I looked at it, I assumed that it would allow for a deeper hierarchy, but strictly speaking, I'm not 100% sure. I do feel like, f- up until now, when people have asked about being able to organize uploaded media assets in a hierarchy, I've tended to go with the explanation that they can just associate it with a taxonomy hierarchy, which I think definitely sort of scratches the itch in a certain way, but from a UI standpoint, probably falls well short of the experience people are looking for. So something like this that layers on a UI, as you say, hopefully still maintaining the ability to have that deeper hierarchy. I mean, it talks about a recursive search, which makes me think that it must support deeper
Yeah.
hierarchies, but I do feel like is definitely gonna give people more of the experience that they're looking for when they ask for that kind of a question.
Yeah, and it does expressly state that it's a for a taxonomy vocabulary, not changing the physical file location of the files. So I guess that is a good point to make there, just to make sure people understand that it's not organizing your files folder, which we all know files folders, they can be a little unruly sometimes. All right. Well, I feel like this one's pretty straightforward. Not a lot to chat about here, but I feel like like I said, very useful and one of those great kind of UI sort of tools that you can add on to Drupal to make things a little bit easier. So, Martin, thank you for bringing us this wonderful module of the week. And if folks wanted to reach out to you, suggest a module, how could they go about doing that?
We tend to have some really good discussions about candidates for module of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as Man Clue on all of the Drupal and social platforms.
Wonderful. And Martin, you're gonna stick around, so I won't say bye. I won't say bye to you yet. Let's move on to our primary topic. All right. So my role here is going to be as like Drupal code dum dum. So I'm gonna try to make this pretty heavy topic digestible for our listeners. But checks to start off, like, can you just give like a overview of kind of like what are hooks? Why does Drupal have them? What do they do?
So hooks were very, very, very simple mechanism or did almost at the very beginning of the Drupal project. It is a way for a module to define that it implements a certain functionality which is code for each modules. It is somewhat similar to events, which perhaps more developers are familiar with, but but it is extremely simple. The way you were writing one of these is you wrote the module name, an underscore, and then the name of the hook. So if you had, let's say, you were trying to determine access to an object and you had the user module, then all you needed to do is write a function called user.
In like non-technical speak. I think you did a great job because I kind of understand where you were going with that. So thumbs up there. But so like if I understand you correctly, it basically was, I'm gonna use air quotes here for those folks listening on to the audio, air quotes. It was a hook into the Drupal framework to say my module is using this function or piece of functionality of Drupal core, right?
It is providing this functionality for Drupal core
Okay,
Yeah.
rather. Yes.
got it.
Yeah, so it's kind of the opposite. It's like you can imagine Drupal is about to perform an action. Like Drupal's like, "Hey, I'm about to output a form. Do you want to do anything with this form before I do?" Right?
Got
And
it.
the way that you tell Drupal, like, "Yes, I want to do something with this form," is you implement hook form alter or hook form ID alter, right?
And I think that's probably I won't say the most common one, but the one that everybody's kind of heard about is like hook form alter, right? Because everybody's always trying to alter forms in Drupal.
And it's the most common and it's surprisingly complex. It,
Yes. Here, I really need to note Bayer's excellent observation, which is he said, it's Drupal, man. If we do it, we overdo it. And we overdid this extremely simple concept. Oh, yes, we did. Absolutely, we did. So, just to give you an example, I said it was as simple as writing a function called user underscore access. What could be more simple, right? However, that over the years, things got slightly more complex. And by 2010, we got to the point where we have updated a function called form test, form test, alter, form, alter. We might have overdone this a little bit,
Oh, what
just a
what was
little bit.
that? What was that use queue alt query alter one? There's a hook and core for a test that's like 45 characters long because it's just altering additional things as it goes. It's pretty wild.
Well, I was going to
So
say, I remember when I was studying for my first Drupal certification, one of the things that I had to keep going back to study was the various views hooks and the order in which they fire, because that was like almost guaranteed to be one of the questions on the test, and it was.
and
Yeah,
did you get it right?
I think so. I mean, at the end of the test, they tell you section by section what percentage you got. They don't sort of like question by question tell you whether you were right or wrong. So
Got it. Well, yeah, I mean, you passed, so you must have
I
must have
passed. So
done must have done all right. And you know that there's an order that you could go look up later. So I mean, win 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 all around. So Nick is going to ask a question about object-oriented programming and potentially get us down the path here as to why this change had to be made. But I'm curious, before we get into that, like how were these hooks? I mean, how are these hooks written, right? Like, were they just uh, they weren't
You,
object oriented? So, like, how are they written? What were they?
do you mean on the implementation side or on the Drupal side, like the Drupal?
Well, I
Um,
thought I knew what I meant, but now you asked that question, and maybe I don't. I mean, I
so
guess I mean, like,
yeah, so
yeah,
I
go
I
ahead.
so,
I I can answer both. Well, go ahead. Checks.
so in a very generic way, in a very, very generic way, I would call this the old Drupal. The way it was written is that it was written ad hoc. We thought it's a good idea at the time. We did it. There was, for the first 10 plus years, there was not a lot of thought or design or anything like that going, planning.
Mm.
There was later, there was a little. I mean, I have participated in some, but most of the time, we just went ahead and and did it. And honestly, that's where we are going. Of why did this needed to change? This needed to change because Drupal 7 basically collapsed under the weight of these of a decade of decisions. Perhaps most tellingly, there was an issue filed at the very end of 2009 by the core maintainers themselves, which said that the form and entity API integration is unbroken. Okay, so the core people themselves didn't understand what was in Drupal 7, what was happening in Drupal 7. So, yeah, things needed to change. Drupal 8 went in, changed, beautifully cleaned up a lot of things, but it couldn't do all of it, right? There was an awful lot of Drupal code, and it just couldn't be done in 8.
And
And so cleaning up hooks were just, we just punted on it.
so
So
is that like kind of like that early Drupal code? Is that what's considered like procedural? Like,
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
yeah, okay,
procedural is just like there's a function in a dot module file, for example. That's
right,
procedural,
right, right,
and
right, right.
that's how when we say Drupal request would say like, hey, I'm about to render a form. Do you want to do something? Especially in the early days, it really what it did was say, okay, what's the list of modules? Okay, I have a list of 80 modules or 100 modules that are installed. Okay, start with the first module. is there a function that exists called that module underscore form alter? Is there a module that exists that is the second module underscore form alter? And it would just loop through every single one. And if it found one, it would run that. And if it would run that function and then it would move on to the next.
And by default, it would do that alphabetically, right? And then you would have to jump through hoops if you needed to have your thing
Yeah,
happen before or after something else, right?
let's get to weights and ordering and a hook
Okay.
form alter later in the show. And there's an explicit
Yeah.
question about that. That's advanced.
Should have called this show A1 underscore hook something, something, something.
So the issue that finally converted hooks to an object-oriented approach was not the first issue around it. In fact, I think we closed over 120 years worth of old issues when this finally landed. Chex, can you kind of give the bird's eye view of why people wanted to convert hooks to object-oriented?
So the primary reason for that is dependency injection primarily, and also easier replacement of functionality. Drupal has always been awesome at adding functionality, but removing functionality, if another module does something that you do not want to happen, we have not been that good at that for a long time. And we had
Yeah.
very, very, very awkward, ugly solutions towards that. So these needed to be addressed. These needed to be addressed. And I really need to clean up a common misunderstanding. It's not that the object oriented programming model is somehow superior. It's just that the tools that the PHP language gives you are far superior when dealing with classes and objects than when dealing with procedural functions. And so, because of this, Drupal needed to embrace a more OOP approach. But there's that's just basically a side effect. So
Yeah.
that's what the language gives us. That's what we need to work with. There is no, we haven't suddenly have seen the light, and
Yeah.
decided that we want it to be Java or C++.
So-
No, it's just what we have to work with. And so that's why it became OOP, because that's what it could be to achieve.
So check my Drupal history here, right? So like core moved to a more OOP model in Drupal 8. Was that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Drupal 8 was a complete air quotes, complete rewrite, right? But hooks didn't kind of make that conversion because it would have been severely disruptive to, module development as we know it, right?
The tool, so, hooks are very special to Drupal because there are so many of them.
Yeah.
It's what you write day in and day out. Therefore, the requirements for anything replacing hooks are very strict. That's why there were, as Nick have noted, an inordinate amount of issues trying to solve all the problems, and none of them could.
Yeah.
Simply the language itself and the libraries were not yet there. That basically came much later. I would say that the very first version, when we could have started thinking seriously of doing this, was 10.2.
Okay.
So
So
there was not even a chance of having a workable solution before that.
got it. And what enabled? So if Drupal went OOP in with version 8, what in 10.2 enabled us to like seriously start talking about this?
Auto wiring got enabled in core services. Auto wiring is key to the entire concept, because when you were writing procedural, and this is what we wanted to keep, you just write something, no boilerplate, no boilerplate. You just write something and it works. or at worst, very minimal boilerplate. It would have, I mean, just using the event dispatcher was like people were suggesting that, right?
Mm.
But that's not working because then you need to write an entire new event object for every single hook, and there are very many of them. And then you need to subscribe to those, and so forth and so forth. That was just a no go. So when you had AutoWire, then the door have opened because now you could write services which get dependency injected automatically.
Mhm.
You don't need to write boilerplate anymore.
Mm.
The
Yep.
question was, however, what we are going to do with this capability. This was only the enabler part of it.
Mm.
And then Chris Vanderwater, maybe you know him from his nick as Eclipse GC, have realized that we could use part of the event dispatcher. This is going to get too technical, so I won't go into that. So he had realized a very clever way of using the event dispatcher component, not
Mhm.
the actual event dispatcher itself, just a part of the component. And I basically got nerd sniped by the concept. I picked it up and carried it home over, well, it took about half a year.
6 months.
So Martin was going to ask what the benefits are of this, but I mean, like, to me, it seems like just in what you said there, a couple of things, and Martin can obviously feel free to add on to this, or Nick can feel free to add on to this, where I may be wrong, or they may have other ideas, but like. First one for me was like moving this to OOP opens up better tooling in PHP that can be used better. It elevates that get off the island mentality where now like more PHP generalists could come in and kind of understand what we're building, right? And the other thing here is that, and you just mentioned this, is that it uses some Symfony tooling as well that, again, emphasizes that point of getting off the island and not just kind of like using Drupal stuff.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll just chime in here really quick to say too, like the dependency injection piece, by the way, there one of the things is you can make sure that the dependencies are available at the time that something is happening, right? So I don't remember the exact hook, but there was a hook in like content moderation or contact or something that when we went to convert it, it was using a service. So when you're in procedural land, you need to call into something object oriented. You have to use like Drupal service to get the service and call it. And that hook just existed forever. When I converted it, I turned on dependency injection. That service didn't exist. So this hook was calling code that Core had removed like 4 years ago. But because there was no dependency injection, there was nothing like checking like available to be like, hey, does this thing that we're trying to use actually exist? And the answer is no. So
So, question, and I don't want to go down this
yeah, let's not. Let's
this just infinite bottomless loop of ordering and whatnot, but like, does the dependency injection and those checks help with like the ordering of calling for
yep.
services and hooks
No,
and stuff? No.
that's a different benefit. That's also a huge benefit. That this is what I mentioned about where this is where the language tooling comes in. That basically, if you have a function,
Hmm.
that just is. You cannot do anything with it. But if you have a method, and then it is just not there.
Yeah.
This
And,
is
and
very fundamentally different, and you can, and if it's, and because it's a service and we load services, we can change which class actually serves as that service and all that jazz. So ordering, replacement, all of that becomes possible. That's different from dependency injection, but dependency injection is extremely
enables
important.
it.
Not code cleanliness, easier to work with, easier to understand, easier to test.
Yeah.
It is so much easier to test because previously testing hooks were not exactly easy. Now it is, well, it is pretty, now it has become pretty
Yeah.
easy. You can choose
Does
whatever tooling you want because you can, because dependency injection means that if instead of the real service you send in a mock service, as long as it's the same interface, no one is the wiser.
does it
No
also
one.
help with scoping too? Like, is
Well,
scope better controlled?
yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I was gonna say. So one of the consequences of what Chex just said, by the way, for the benefits is right now, all the code that you have in your .module file is always there, right? It's
Mm,
always loaded. It's always in PHP with some exceptions. But when they're classes, like that class is only gonna load when it needs it. So if you have a
yeah,
hook that very rarely runs, well, now it's gonna get like looked at when hooks are getting cataloged essentially, like
yeah,
collected, and it's only gonna instantiate when it's needed. So that code just kinda sits by itself and doesn't impact memory or anything.
makes sense.
So, Nick, I gather you've put a lot of effort into this overall initiative. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved.
So I had to look this up today because I thought it was like about a year ago, last July-ish. And it started with kind of I prefaced it with this might be a dumb question. And I won't say that like looking back, maybe it was dumb because it got me involved in something that I wasn't aware of. But it ended up being a much deeper question, I thought. And Chex had posted something about the root issue of converting hooks adding the feature to allow object-oriented hooks. And my question was, what about .theme files? And the question on its face didn't make sense in this case because now I know enough to know that we were dealing with module hooks and module handler. But it turned out to be a really interesting question because you when you're implementing hooks and just utilizing them, you think a hook is a hook is a hook. But it turns out that there are different classes of hooks or different types of hooks, right? And the question of what are the different types of hooks in the beginning took me, I mean, I invested probably 30 hours of reading and looking into things, but there are different types of hooks that can be converted at different types. And realizing that is what kind of started me. I was like, you know what? This is an easy thing. Because I remember I asked, like later on in the issue, we asked Jax, well, what are the exceptions? What are the hooks that we aren't converting right now? And I don't remember your exact words, Chex, but it was something along the lines like, I have no idea. I'm not figuring that out. And I was like, oh, you know what? That's something easy. TM. That's something easy that I can figure out. And now the really funny thing is I've been working very deeply in this section of Drupal for over a year now, and I just about 3 weeks ago, I just found 2 more hooks that can't be object oriented that nobody even knew existed. Well, I'm sure somebody somewhere knew it existed.
Can you
Um,
quickly explain why they can't?
okay. So, hmm,
I mean, no is a completely acceptable answer, so they
yeah,
could
I
follow up
mean,
with you later.
the main answer is about where and when they are either collected or they're executed, right? So for a good example is hook install, right? Hook install can't be object oriented at the moment. And the main reason is because it can be called before Drupal's installed as part of the Drupal installation process or when the module is installed. So there's some edge cases about what can be like what services are available at the time. Now those exist now, but it's a lot easier to keep that separate when it's procedural. Another example is like update, post hook post update. It just that piece of code doesn't use the module handler to execute the the hooks. It's using function exists, and
So
function exists is not an
basically
object
you're
oriented.
saying things that are kind of like outside of Drupal's normal operation, right? So like installs, updates, those are kind of outside of like Drupal's
Yeah,
functioning as a system, and
and then
you don't
yeah,
have a good way into those things right now.
yeah, and then the other two big exceptions are themes, and that's just because themes don't their namespace isn't registered, so, like, you can't like, there's no way for it to, like, auto discover that stuff, uh,
Um,
again, I'm trying not to go too deep in the weeds here. And then what was the final one? There was the hooks that run at a time, hooks that aren't during install time, but they run during the hook collection process. Although we've found a way to like remove those, but for example, hook info and hook module implements alter, which again we'll talk about later. But that's how I get involved. A simple question: what about theme files?
This reminds me of something. In 2005, I was trying to get a contract with the Hungarian border forces. And so I have asked Dries whether does the project have a security point of contact or something like that. Guess what happened? Next thing I know, I am the first security team leader. Be very careful when asking questions in the Drupal project. Be very, very careful when asking questions in the Drupal project.
Yeah, you get assigned. By the way, this is one of my favorite things of working with checks over the last year is that you'll post a question, post a solution, be like, oh yeah, you know what? I remember an issue from 2003. Here it is. It took 9 years to solve and 400 comments. The Drupal historian side of things is pretty fascinating.
I would also like to tell our listeners that I ask plenty of questions in the Drupal community and don't get roped into like heavy manual labor within the Drupal community. So don't be afraid to ask your questions. Sometimes it'll be about a .theme file and you'll spend a year looking for, hooks in core, but sometimes you might just get an answer to your question.
That's not true though,
The,
John.
the, the two are very different. You are talking about basically support-like questions. I'm writing a contrib module. I'm writing custom code. How do I do X? And we usually help with that. What Nick did and what I did was, you are contributing to core, and basically you have a leading question. That's when you might get roped in.
And I was gonna say, John, what you said is not true either, because you're part of the event organizing working group, and you spend a ton of time helping organize NetCamp and on the podcast. So you certainly do provide your time because of questions that you've asked in the past. It's just not code contribution. So
Yeah,
let's
that's
move on
fair.
though.
That's fair.
Let's move on though, because I think there's an interesting story about, was it Dev Days Burgess? I think, or
Yes.
so what happened at Dev Days Burgess, and how did that impact this journey?
Well, it was very fundamental. So basically, I felt it would take way too long to discuss. This is, once again, hooks are basically the most important, most fundamental part of Drupal. So talking that through, how we change it with the core committers, with the core leaders, I thought it's going to take too long online. So I went to Burgas to talk to them. I talked to them. We figured out how to what is the exact scope, how do we solve a couple tricky issues, basically what are we doing. It has always been the way we do it. The Drupal project does it much less these days. We used to have code sprints, but since we are moving much slower now, there's not really a need for sprints. But that's how things used to happen. Coral, a dozen Drupal developers in a room, close the door and don't let them out for 3 days. And then good things happen. That's how we got a lot of stuff done. That's how we got a lot of stuff done. It is an interesting lesson that, although I vastly prefer remote working, absolutely nothing matches the velocity of a real world sitting down discussion.
Well, I wanna turn this question around a little bit too, because one of the really big hurdles, that there were many big hurdles. Let me preface this by saying that, but one of the big hurdles was we were trying to replace the hook system while it was moving. We didn't want to introduce a new system. Here's how you do it now. Stop using procedural hooks; they're not going to work. Like it's a separate system. If we wanted to do that, we could have just used Event Dispatcher, right? we wanted to be able to say, like, we want you to switch to object-oriented hooks, but if you're a contrib module and you're supporting older versions of Drupal, you also need to still have procedural hooks around. So how do we have a backwards compatibility layer so that contrib doesn't just have to be like, well, Drupal 11.1 is out now. Let me make version 5, and that only has object-oriented hooks. How do they develop one code base but support multiple versions of Drupal? And I think Alex was the one that came up with the idea, right?
Yes, Alex both have invented this trick that is currently allowing you to run both old and new. This is very new, very new to Drupal. Well, it is not really, because Drupal 8 is now 10 years old, but this is a fundamental of Drupal now that we just see but try not to. And so this was a very big and very important part. By the way, we are now moving the render system to OP as well, and the same constraint applies. Well, new, and it needs to be able to move gradually over. The
Yeah.
Drupal project cannot afford another break like that was of 7 to 8.
So really quickly for our listeners, what the trick was is when when Drupal is collecting hooks, again, in the old system, it just says, does this function exist? In the new system, it looks for a pattern of those functions and stores them, and it also looks for attributes on the object-oriented methods, right? Or, I mean, there's other ways to do it, but you can also put it on a class. And it builds that list. When you have both options available, you have the procedural one and you have the object-oriented one. If you put the legacy hook attribute on the procedural version, that just tells the new system, hey, ignore me. There's a copy of me that's object-oriented. Use that instead. And then the old version of Drupal just sees the procedural function and just uses it the way it always did. So it's a pretty clever. I mean, it's kind of an expensive BC layer performance wise, but it's a very clever way of solving that issue.
And would I be right in saying that the idea then would be in, let's say, a module that's moving that direction, that the procedural hook would become kind of a wrapper for something that's
Yeah,
provided by
it
the
just
class?
it just calls it just calls the object oriented service because hooks are auto wired services. It can just call it, and Drupal older versions of Drupal know what to do with the service.
Cool.
That's why Check said 10.2 had the technology to make it work, right? That was a piece of it.
Right. So, Nick, you touched earlier on the different types of hooks that you've come to understand. Maybe you or Chex can walk us through, a more fulsome description of those types of hooks and how they impacted the efforts on this.
So there was a fundamental mistake made at, I don't know how long ago, even I don't know how long ago, that when you are theming a certain thing, let's say you are theming a block, okay? Then, or you are theming the HTML of the page, then those things, block, HTML, page, they were also named hooks. I don't know who made that mistake. I don't know why and when. It was certainly extremely long ago, but this is now biting us, basically. I just did a quick Git look. It was actually made in 2007. So, yeah, very old mistake. And basically, what happens is that it is, if you see something called theme underscore hook with all capitals hook, that is not actually a hook in the module. It's not a hook like a module hook. So hooks with lowercase hooks and theme hooks with hook typed in uppercase are completely different things. Okay.
Not confusing
And
at all.
it gets a lot more confusing. This is not where things fly off the rails. Where it does fly off the rails are preprocess, because if you have preprocess underscore hook, where hook is capital, then the preprocess hook is actually a module hook. So the theme hooks, which are not hooks, cross over into module hooks, which are hooks via preprocess. Both Nick and I have just
Yeah, we spend a lot of time working on making pre-process available as object-oriented hooks for 11.2, which is finally out. But yeah, like understanding it, and here's part of the reason that it's really confusing is the theme system is the one that's finding those pre-process hooks, but it's using we were able to set it up to use the module system to find the module ones. So it is very complex. But at the very core, I think that there's like four types at a really high level that like I said, there's the ones that module handler is the one that's executing them, right? There's the ones that the module installer is executing, which also includes Drupal install time. There's the ones that the update system are executing, and then there's ones that themes are directly executing themselves, which
But
include
those last ones are only ones that are in pre-process.
no, because theme also has access to form alter. It has access to most alter hooks. It has like, but when you're implementing it in the theme itself, the theme doesn't have the namespace loaded, so you can't collect those at compile time. Or again, I'm glossing over some really deep technical things, but
Thank you
basically
for
the
that.
theme, yeah, the theme can't do that. So at this point, we have converted or provided alternatives to every single hook that Drupal itself calls that goes through module handler. We have converted a few that module installer calls, like modules installed, pre-install, uninstall, and modules uninstalled, because they happen at a time on modules that can do that. There's a bunch that we haven't converted. And then we've converted nothing in a .theme file is converted. So if you've written a procedural thing in .theme, it's not converted, it stays the same. And then update time, we have not converted any of those yet either.
and we will not. Those are gone.
Yeah.
They cannot be salvaged. They will just be replaced with a completely different system, a new system that does the same thing. It's gonna be object oriented, but it is not going to be a conversion in the same sense that hooks were. It's not gonna be a one-on-one equivalent. It will achieve the same goal, but this will be a much bigger difference. Hook install and hook update and will be the two that we need to change. If you have worked with Laravel, there are Laravel migrations, for example. That's what people are looking at to replace hook update and web.
Yeah.
So the goal is that you had a previous code base, which, because it was previous, it had a different way of storing data. You have a new one. Now you want to migrate. And you don't want to write and execute a full on Drupal migration, a source plugin, process plugin, destination plugin, and run it in place. You just want to do mini migration, but what does this small change gets executed on the database? So it's just going. That's what hook update then does too. It's just going to be a different way of expressing the same thing, but it will be
Yeah.
different. It's you can't the current thing what what has been cooked for hooks basically relies on Drupal running normally. Drupal builds a container and then runs using that container. If you have no working container because right now you are changing the code base, then this whole thing just doesn't work. It cannot
Yeah.
work. I tried making it work, and this is one of my gripes with the Symfony. It is locked down so hard that you cannot do it. This
But
is one of the reasons I dislike so much private and
I
final that you cannot make it work.
I strongly agree with you here, but let's stick to hooks because that can be a whole separate show talking about final.
Yeah, well, yes.
I wanted to maybe ask a bit of a follow up, maybe a slightly tangent question, but a lot of these changes that we're talking about, you guys have done a massive amount of work on getting core updated, but how does all of this impact contrib authors who may have modules that define their own hooks in terms of getting those converted over, as well as things like API files that sort of describe how to extend things that are being done within those modules?
Great
Yep.
question.
So first, let me thank the Drupal Association for financing my work on API module, which
Oh, they
tests
did. That's awesome.
this. Yep, I just got a few weeks contract, and I'm basically done with all the API bug fixing, except answering your question. That's what I'm doing this week. That's what I'm doing exactly this week. So if you are a contrib module, then converting is fairly easy because we have a rector rule, which is battle tested. The battle was converting core. So you take Drupal rector, point it at your module, and it's gonna convert it. It is going to put the legacy shim in it. So it is completely automated.
And I use this on web form, by the way, and it worked. So web form was able to be
That's a pretty
thousands of
sizable module too.
yeah.
And if you are firing module hooks, then you don't need to do anything. It is 100% backwards compatible. That was extremely important. This is one of those restrictions that I said that didn't make it possible previously to convert. We wanted to make sure that you can just fire a hook. You want to write a new hook? Fire it. Now it exists. There is no formal registry. There is no new object, nothing. Just fire your hook. It's great. It's working. As for API files, I
But,
have
but
managed the time, but now that has been done. So what is going to happen is that API Drupal.org is going to link when you have an attribute which says hook some hook name on a hook implementation, then that hook name is going to be linked to the api.php file, pretty much the same as it is done for procedural files. And I'm going to say, and when I'm saying that it is going to do that, by that I mean it is going to, maybe by the time you are releasing this podcast next Monday, it might be it might be actually doing it. But if not by my Monday, then most likely next week, yes. We are at that point. The latest deployment of API Drupal.org now displays attributes correctly, links the attributes to their attribute classes.
yeah.
It doesn't yet link hooks, but it now correctly links attributes, which is pretty new. And once again, the DA is financing this, so it is definitely happening. It is most definitely happening. So the country, I I think the contrib is at a good place.
Well, I want to chime in and say there's one exception, I think, on the defining hook side, right? So if you're a contrib module and you defined a custom hook, a new hook, if you use module handler to invoke it or invoke one of the invoke methods, like check set, it will work. If you decided to be clever and looked at how they used to invoke hooks and did something yourself where you just loop over the list of modules and do a function exists, yeah, that's not going to work. But updating that is as simple as just changing it to use module handler invoke, which is what you're supposed to use in the first place, right? Same thing. Like if you're calling things directly, like there were a ton of tests and core that called like block what was it block certain block hooks directly, block rebuild, I think it was, and you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to just invoke it, and as long as you convert to that, you'll be able to take advantage of the new stuff.
Yes, so there are a few edge cases like this, which so basically, let's say 99% of contrib is at a good place. If you were doing something that you were not supposed to do, then you need to fix that. And there is one case that is broken, that has been broken. It has been sacrificed at the altar of progress. I don't know what, but that is so small and so rare that that nobody has even yet caught what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to disclose what it is.
Okay,
Ignore that.
I know what you're talking about, but I'll keep that
So,
as an exercise for our listeners.
so based on the answer to the previous question, right? You've made it easier for module maintainers to update their modules and continue working in the way that they're accustomed to. Alex has provided kind of this magic thing that allows for the old way of doing hooks and the new way of doing hooks to kind of still keep working. Everything, seems great and wonderful, but like Drupal is a large system and has many years of use on it, right? How do you go about kind of like converting core, making this change within core and like, you know, getting the community to kind of like go along with it? Because sometimes that's half the battle, right?
Well, I'll talk about converting core itself. Contrib has been slowly picking it up and doing it. And I've been getting a lot of questions about edge cases and things. But converting core itself was, I think, an interesting story on its own, right? So core, the we got almost everything in one go, just to preface this. And that, I don't remember the exact final thing, but that merge request had something like 28,000 additions and 26,000 subtractions or something. It was a huge pull request. And so what happened was the original issue got merged, right? Object oriented hooks are available. And I think we converted 3 hooks in that, or 2 or 3 hooks in that as a proof of concept. And so being industrious, I was like, you know what? We're going to have to convert core. Let's make an issue. And again, the first issue was the third core issue I think I had ever worked on. So I was very naive, but I think that naivete helped us because I was like, you know what? Now it's time to convert core. I'll create a meta. I'll talk about it. We'll come up with the process and we'll convert it. And Chex had started working on the rectal rule that he had mentioned on converting core. And I was like, you know what? Let's start with, I don't remember what we started with. Was it user? I think we started with the user module as a test case because it's complex. And we started running it against it. And that issue immediately started getting mired down in processing. Drupal is a great community. One of the biggest gripes I've had, which I've said on the show before, is that the bike shedding for making updates is out of control.
Hold on a
Is
second. Hold on a second. Bike shedding, define that for
Yeah.
folks that don't know what that means.
So bike shedding is like when you have 2 options, somebody provides a third, and it's not about something crucial. So, for example, discussion started, well, what should the class name be for the hook? Should it be node hooks, or should it be form hooks, or should it be node form hooks, or should it be, and it's valuable discussion to be clear, but it's something that with a large community is almost impossible to come to consensus on, right? In any reasonable set of time, right? And then, okay, what hooks go in this class? What hooks go in that class? How should we document them? Like it started getting bike shedded. So I set that aside and I just started working on the user issue, and we solved a bunch of things. We found a bunch of gaps. So for example, we had converted hook flush cache, and we found out that because the way module installer works, that can't be object oriented. It doesn't. It does. We've since fixed that, but it doesn't fire. There's a We had a rudimentary hook ordering system in the original issue that we had to rip out as fast as we could because it turns out ordering hooks is complicated and we had missed a ton of stuff. So Chex and I started working on the user module. I think I added 1 or 2. And then I was like, you know what would be funny? Let me run this rule on all of core just to see what happens. And it worked. Now, and when I say it worked, there were a lot of failures. There were a lot of issues. And so, for example, I don't know if you guys know this, but there are 2 files in the migrate module that are like 8 MB each. Vector does not like those files. And there's a module that has an empty .info file because it's meant to be broken. And like, there's a lot of edge cases. But I basically just started working through all those edge cases and I built this massive bash script that basically made it so I could repeatedly run through convert core and then apply. I think there were 10 patches at the end that would like fix individual issues that we found out. But over the course of about 3 weeks or 2 weeks, I was able to get that issue to a point where it would run, it would convert every single core hook that we knew about. We missed a couple, and tests were passing reliably. So, like, because here's the other issue: core is big. There's a lot of issues. When you run an automated conversion, any merges upstream are now going to be a conflict that you can't resolve because we're just copying code from one place to another. It's not like you could just look at it and be like, "Oh, this is the right way," or merge that stuff in. You can't resolve that because it's moving to a completely new file. I mean, you can, but it's not in a way that you can do it reliably to comfortably commit it. So you have to be able to rerun this command in a reliable way. And I caught lightning in a bottle. I got very lucky that it happened at the very end of 11.1, right before 11.2, and I caught the attention of Catch and a couple of other core committers and release managers, and they had agreed to kind of a once in there have been big things like when we went to Drupal 8 and moved everything to core, but I think I got lucky and it got merged in, but it was I think it's a good thing we did it because if we hadn't, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. Knowing what I know now of core and the way things work, I think we wouldn't have finished converting core until 2028. I mean, it would take years,
So
years.
Nick, I have a sub question here, right? So you worked on this for 2 or 3 weeks, edited 28 plus lines of code, right?
28,000.
28,000, sorry. Yes, I did forget a word there. Just from a contribution open source guy standpoint, are you doing this on your own time? Are you being funded by
Yeah.
anybody
I
or
So I invested probably 85 to 100 hours of time in that 3-week period on this, and no, it was just personal. I was stuck on
okay,
it, and I could not. So, yeah, my billables for the month of October were not good. I
right.
I it was not sustainable. It was a contribution I made to go if it had not gotten in, it honestly would had the potential to just turn me off from core. Not that 'cause like, it was an enormous amount of effort. Knowing what I know now, I don't know if I would've taken it on because the odds of that happening again are very slim.
Yeah, right. So I mean, like, I just wanted to highlight, and I'm sure this is true of checks as well, right? That you guys are spending a lot of personal time and capital to make these changes
Yeah,
to kind of
absolutely.
better the world you live in, right? And that's greatly appreciated. The other thing I think that you said that was important. I mean, you said a lot of important things, but the other one I kind of gravitated towards was the you called it bike shedding. I call it perfect is the enemy of good enough, right? In the Drupal community, we like to, and again, I love the Drupal community. I think we produce wonderful stuff, but a lot of times we like to make very perfect modules, contributions, software code, etc., as opposed to like taking the approach of, hey, we can just build good enough modules, software and stuff and iterate on them as we go. I mean, as long as you're not destroying core, breaking core, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I understand the reasons behind it. The more I get involved, the more I understand. It's a process that we've built up, but yeah, it's the one thing I would love to change.
And it's a
Um,
complicated system. Like, I'm not saying
yeah,
like, "Oh, it's just easy."
yeah,
Just like, put some code in there and it does things, right?
yeah.
It's
You
very
you you
complicated.
can't do that, but also it's a problem. It's an issue that needs to
Right.
be solved.
Right.
So, Nick touched on earlier that there were a few hooks that were particularly challenging. Can we go into a little bit more detail on those?
Yeah, so I'll do the quick highlight of them checks, and then feel free to jump in. So the 4 that were kind of problematic are hook info, which is what allows you does a lot of stuff, but allows you to put your hooks in a different file. Hook module implements alter, which is the bane of my existence and probably the most complicated issue that I've ever worked on in my life. Hook requirements, which became 2 separate hooks and a special one-off
W
class.
wait a second. Go back to the last one you mentioned. What does that one do? Like,
Hook
why do you need
module im
that?
Oh, yeah. Hook module implements alter allows you to at runtime change the order that hooks are running in. So basically, it runs
God, that
when
sounds awful, but okay, continue.
so basically when form alter happens, if you want to say, hey, my form alter should happen before that other module, you can do
Yeah.
that. But you can also do things like, hey, this hook that's running, let's not run that. Or this other module, I want to put them somewhere else. Or, oh, I want to just dynamically create some random hooks and have them go first. Like
Okay.
it
Continue down
does
your list. We get it.
stuff.
It's complete
Yeah.
chaos. Understand. Keep going.
Yes. And then finally, as we had mentioned, pre-process hooks and template pre-process hooks, which can be hooks and might not be hooks. All of those are challenging and massive issues on their own. Probably the most interesting to talk about is hook module implements alter, though. I don't know if you want to. That went through a couple rewrites.
I don't feel like there was a question there. You just kind of went through
Yeah.
the
So
list and
so
then
yeah, I was
yeah.
just gonna say. So Chex, do you want to talk about? So when we started to approach hook module implements alter, what were you thinking?
All my old sins are coming back to haunt me. Module implement alter, although it was originally conceived by Aaron, may he rest in peace, is mostly my fault. It was supposed to be followed up by a lot of better developer experience, but those didn't happen for all sorts of reasons. So basically, we exposed the internal data structure to everybody, and it just stayed like that. And then when we went in and completely rewrote the modular system so that structure didn't exist anymore, it just didn't exist anymore, then we needed to emulate it to exist. And then we needed to write something else which provided a similar functionality, but as you have noted, the functionality was basically anything goes.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and
So a
providing
couple of
functionality which does that is turns out to be extraordinarily hard.
Yeah, to give you a little bit of more detail there, when we so hook module implements alter can't be object oriented, right? But the underlying functionality of hook module implements alter can be object oriented and they're interoperable. So there's a BC layer. Basically, hook module implements alter became a really complicated parameter on hooks called order. You can say it's order, you order something first, last, before, or after something. And then you have a lot of options that you can do there. You can remove another hook. You can reorder another hook. And then there's a whole complicated BC layer that I'm not even going to talk about. But it took, again, that issue over the course of, I don't know, 5, 6 months, probably took about 80 to 100 hours of my time investment.
So wrapping up the challenging hooks topic, I'm just curious how many of these challenging hooks still exist
Oh,
and
they're all
which
solved.
one well, I'm
So
sorry, what?
so yeah,
Say that again.
so hook info is just deprecated. We're getting rid of it, although
Okay.
there's some special notes around that. Hook module implements also can be replaced in a BC way. Hook requirements can be replaced with the new class and the hook runtime requirement, and hook update requirement.
Yeah.
And then preprocess hooks in modules can be OOP just normally. And that includes both hook preprocess and hook preprocess hook. And then template preprocess can become object-oriented callbacks that just get defined on hook theme
So basically what
directly.
you're telling me is all the challenging hooks have been
Oh,
are no longer challenging.
they're still
Yeah,
challenging, but they've been solved.
yes.
Got it. All right.
Nick have solved the challenges here mostly. Nick and
Don Quixote
Don as well. Yes.
and Andreas, I think is his name. So yeah, I can't. We have to give him credit because he rewrote.
Yes.
Chex and I came up with an initial draft, and he rewrote it. Yeah, my
Each
God.
Okay.
So Andres have done amazing work on ordering.
Yeah.
I've done what I my best. He did better. This is amazing in the Drupal community when that happens. I wish it happened more often.
So let's jump into a lightning round with the last minute here before we end the show. One or two word answers only. So I'll ask the first one.
I-
When will hooks in themes be able to be converted?
I'm hoping to hook checks on that for 11.3, but we'll see.
All right, 11.3.
This is that seamers need to write PHP is a blight on Earth. It shouldn't happen.
Okay,
Let,
I
let's
can
leave,
get
let's
behind
leave it
that.
there. Let's leave it there. Let's move on.
I, I
I
can,
I
I can,
agree.
I can get behind that, but maybe we talk about that at a DrupalCon or on a future episode.
Okay, the changes that we've talked about, what version of Drupal can people start using this in?
The original changes were 11.1. The challenging hooks were 11.2.
So like right now is the answer
Mhm.
to that question. I like it. This
Yep.
like it's like current news happening right in front of us. Okay, so what was the hardest part of getting this change into core? And I'll give you like 5 or 6 words on this one because I don't think 2 words is going to do it.
Getting competent reviews and
Getting
agreement.
competent reviews. Okay. Yeah, I imagine that you need some deep knowledge in order to do a realistic code review there.
Yep.
Okay. Jax, any thoughts on that on your end?
It's too easy to get incompetent reviews. On the other hand,
Oh yeah, that is fair. I would agree. I would tend to agree with that.
All right. Also, in the spirit of keeping things succinct, give us a short explanation of the process of getting this kind of a change in core, particularly something that's, 28,000 lines of changes.
I'll
don't
take
do
that.
it.
Yeah. I'll take this really quickly. I mean, first of all, you want to be part of the core development channel in Slack. You want to build up some on some level, you want to build up some reputation, right? If you're going to be doing a bigger thing, working on some smaller things to show what you can do is helpful. Communicating with the core team and maintainers and release managers to see if it's something that they're willing to do. You don't want to don't do what I did. Don't invest hundreds of hours on something that you're not sure will even make it in because you will get burned out and get burned. Like you definitely want to make sure that it's something that they'd be willing to do in the first place.
So side question there, does having a Drupal veteran working alongside you help with
Yeah,
that
finding a
process?
mentor is absolutely essential.
There you go. All right. So last certainly not least, what's next? It feels like you have pushed this big boulder up the mountain. Like the boulder is on top of the mountain now. Are we just moving on to another issue or is there more to do here?
Yes.
I
Without
have found a bigger border to roll up a much bigger mountain.
All
And
right.
that's
yeah.
the
Chex is moving
rendering.
on to bigger boulders and bigger mountains. Nick, what about
Yeah.
you?
Yeah. I mean, I we've been working on render arrays, like Chex just said, and we just rolled out kind of the first piece of that. We've also got Form API. And then my personal folder is I'm trying to get rid of the core and glue files and .module files in core. And that's turning into
Feel
a
like
much bigger mountain than
feel like we're gonna
thought
have
it
to
would be.
talk about why you want to do that, but that's for another show. Well, Chex, thank you for joining us. Nick, thank you for your insight into this, and both of you, thanks for the great work making Drupal core better for the rest of us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal or by email show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and clicking the Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right. We have reached the end of our show. Chex, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, talk to you about Drupal lore, about hooks, about anything, how would they go about doing that?
Probably the easiest is to just send me a direct message on Drupal Slack. My nick is CAJax, and I'm always online.
There you go. Martin, what about you?
Folks can find me as Manclue on all of the Drupal and social platforms, or they can read some of my more in depth musings about Drupal on manclue.com.
And Nick Laughlin?
You can find me online at Nixvan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me personally at picozzi.com, or you can find me on social media and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. If you're interested in EPAM, you can find out about them at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.